Well, my guest today is Craig Foster, the infamous, Socceroos commentator and human rights advocate. That's how I know you, Craig.
It's a pretty crazy term. I always think it's a ridiculous term, but that's what people say.
You are.
Human rights, like why should you have to advocate for human rights? Imagine the world that we kind of live in.
But that goes to exactly why you're so passionate about this, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We're recording this in the midst of the World Cup, so obviously Australia's been knocked out.
Egregiously knocked out, Jess, as we always are in sport.
Yes. But how good were some of those players from the Aussie team? And, I must say, and, partly we can't have this conversation without covering, the big elephant in the room in Australia at the moment, which is multiculturalism. And just seeing all those faces, smiling faces when they're winning, defeated faces when they're not, but a diversity of faces. And that's who we are, right?
Yeah, geez, that's, if you want to do a podcast, that's like talking to me about that is like 3 hours long. So we've got to stack this one in quick. So, yeah, it's been the experience of my life, that football, the game itself is actually multiculturalism. And, we got a doco out at the moment that's on SBS called Wogball, which is really very well timed. And when that was done, I don't know, I can't remember when I filmed part of it, but it might have been a year ago. No one knew that we were going to be exactly here. It turned out to be perfectly well timed. Because what it effectively says is that the game of football has always reflected the face of Australia. And because of that, it's often been externalised in the same way that immigrants have been externalised, right? And so now it's no different. It's just that Awer Mabil and Nestor Irankunda look different to Mark Viduka or Milan Ivanovic, who was a famous Serb player from South Australia, which obviously you're from, who I played with at Adelaide City, right?
Yeah.
And he went on to play for, one of the most famous clubs, Red Star in Belgrade, and then play for Australia. And that was our immigration at that point. It's just that it's slightly changed, and so does the face of Australia, and so does the Socceroos. So it's an incredibly powerful game in that respect.
And it's called the world game. It is, and
Yep.
That's not just because so many different places around the world play it, but it is loved by so many countries around the world and communities around the world, right? It's the one thing that does unite us when we think about, there's the Olympics, but then
it's not close.
It's not close.
No. There's a good reason why it's not close, but because, the Olympics are also many exclusionary sports. Like skiing in the Winter Olympics, for example. Like, you need a lot of money to be a skier, typically,
Yes.
right? And all of these things. So there's elements around football which has captured almost the entire world. And we've seen even in what's been the most politicised tournament in modern history, that's saying a lot after Qatar and Russia, but Trump has turned it into, his own tournament. He's turned it into a MAGA World Cup, effectively.
Well,
Right.
I want to ask you about that. What about this? While we're still in the midst of the game, what about Donald Trump's intervention on the red card?
It was just fantastic. It was the funniest thing I've seen happen for a long, long time. I just enjoyed that 48 hours so much because he's an absolute clown, right? But, really far right or, politicians in Australia, they're only as credible as the media gives them credibility. And this is what's happened with Trump. I mean, the guy's a convicted felon, for God's sake, So, here we are with a guy, the most powerful person in the world, really, who has been, in a civil case anyway, has been found guilty of sexual abuse. And he's actually guilty of all of these felony counts and the like. I mean, it's just the craziest situation for the world to be in. So what happens is, of course, when he's hosting the World Cup, he's going to do the same stuff to the World Cup that he does to everyone else. So my take on the World Cup, and this goes to the heart of the world game, the world game reflects the world in a way that probably maybe nothing else does, not even other sport, right? And what that means is Argentina become Argentina when they play, And even if a lot of the players are diaspora, including Australia, we've got guys, in Scotland who are playing for Australia. it's still the Australian national team, and Australia still responds to our team in a very Australian way, and that's different to the way France responds, and Argentina responds, and England responds.
So it's that kind of global politics.
Yeah, it's always
there that exists when we talk about trade deals.
Exactly,
is,
same stuff.
Is the same stuff when it comes to the World Cup. So So we shouldn't be surprised, is what you're saying.
Well, you can't be surprised. The thing about it is, I've been saying a lot that the only kind of surprise is that Trump doesn't demand a veto over refereeing decisions for the US, China and Russia or whatever, right? This is the reality. Like, this is the world that we are living in. It's a crazy, crazy world. The other thing I think Australians should really understand is that actually we support Trump. We are Trump in many ways. So in other words, Trump dealt with Infantino and FIFA's rules in the same way that he deals with international law. That is, it does not, it
doesn't apply to him.
Congressional laws or constitutional laws or criminal laws. He says it doesn't apply to me, and I can beat every law because I have power and wealth, supposedly. And so what happens is he does that to international law. Okay, so then all of a sudden, the way that he treats countries around the world is the way that he treated Infantino and FIFA and the game that we love. There's nothing different. And so the beauty of that is that I think Australians can, when we reflect on it, and I might write something on this after the tournament, to say, we're supporting him in this, okay? So, in other words...
This is a normalisation of his kind of attitude.
Straight into sport, straight into FIFA. FIFA's obviously a very fertile ground for it because, they're largely corrupt themselves in many ways. But the point of it is this. So there's two players. There was Balogun, the American player, who should have been suspended for at least one game, arguably two. And then there was Quansah, the English player, who... The actual incidents were different, but the severity of what they did wrong was exactly the same. It's called serious foul play. And he was rightly given 2-match suspension, right? And so what Trump did is he said, well, that's our player, and therefore there's the rules. They don't apply to him, but those rules apply to him. Now, that's what Australia's doing. So in other words, what I'm saying is we're doing a Balogun.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Because just last week... Australia abstained from a vote about sanctions on Cuba, for example, and there was only 3 countries or something. So we're only doing Trump's bidding. So what we're saying to Cuba is, you are Quansah from England. We'll apply the law against you, right? And over here, when it happens in US, no, that's Balogun, and we'll change the law or we'll change our language. And we won't use the term. So that's the world we live in.
So what I love about this and how frank you are about it all is so often, and I get told this all the time as a politician, politicians should stay out of sport. Politics should have nothing to do with sport. you get that.
Hilarious.
And yet what you're saying is actually it's all the same thing.
It's all the same thing. So,
it's all the same thing.
Well, when you realise that life is political, obviously, when people get together, when more than one person gets together to do a task, politics are naturally involved. And when you have 3 or more, it gets worse. And then you have committees, and then you've got to, and then you have voting. Once you have voting, and so that's all that sport is. Like, what do you think sport is? Like, you think it's not humans playing it? It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yes.
Of course, I've been involved in sport politics at all levels as well. And you're talking about like sitting on a board of this and that and that and that. I've seen the politics, like you guys, are privy to disgusting politics. In sport, it might not be as vicious, but it's just as bad in many respects. And that's sport. I mean, it is the entire game is political.
Yes. I know we jumped straight into it, so let me just pull back for a second. You obviously played for Australia, and you played domestically and internationally, and then you went into broadcasting. Have you just always loved football and just ever since you were a kid?
Yes, I started when I was 4, and then in the country you play all sports typically.
You grew up in Lismore, yeah?
Lismore, northern New South Wales, yes, land of the floods, sadly.
And more so.
Yeah.
More floods and more floods.
And obviously at the forefront of climate change impacts and the like as well. And so, I just loved it. I loved all sport, but I loved this one particularly. And then when you start to do, the more you love it, the more you practice. That's important.
Yeah.
Why all little kids, you want to help them enjoy the game, and then away you go. I was always a little bit different, though, I must admit, because, even when I was an international and I was a professional, I was playing for Crystal Palace in England, I was a captain, whatever, I was never wholly a part of it. I always was, I was always interested in the rest of the world, and whereas many athletes are strongly encouraged not to be. But, I was studying law, and this is going back to the late 80s, 90s, when it wasn't easy to do. We didn't have online study at the time. So, and I was trying to play at that level on buses and reading my textbooks and carrying on. And I was interested in human rights. I was interested in justice. I wouldn't say I was that interested in politics per se, but so I've kind of always been in different worlds.
Yeah. Well, and I think what we've seen, what I've, seen from your career, and we've worked together a little bit on refugee issues in particular, which has been, wonderful, because often, and I guess this comes to my point about people thinking that, sports people should stick to sports and politicians should stick to politics. I've got a few people saying politicians shouldn't be doing podcasts either, by the way. Oh. So, here we are, you're a broadcaster and we're doing this. Yeah. You have to try new things. You have to kind of use the tools at your disposal for the mission that you want to achieve. And, if it's human rights, if you're a sports person, you've got a platform, getting involved and speaking up, I mean, that's a powerful thing that you have.
Depends per country or whether the people are globally famous and the like. But yes, everyone has a platform, I argue. And also we're all humans. So it just depends at which level of, kind of singularity you look at it. Like we're all, we exist on the one planet. And then under that we go into our countries, and under that we go here, and then we go here. And so people have all of these different identities. And I just keep all of those identities in mind, that's all. Yeah. So sport tries to say to me, you're just an athlete. And I say, well, hang on a minute. The thing is, I also vote, I also have children, also have a family. I'm also interested in what's on Medicare, what's not on Medicare. Like, why should an athlete be any different in terms of how we interact with the world?
Yes.
And sport tries to play into that, because sport doesn't like to upset its sponsors. It doesn't like to upset its government. So it likes to characterise everything off the field as political.
Yes, right.
Including human rights. And what it says is, you can't be worried about those people who were killed building the stadium in Qatar because that's political. You just don't like Qatar, right? It's this sort of ridiculous nature. I just think that we are all social actors in the world, and I don't care if you're a politician or if you're a nurse or if you're a football player. You have a responsibility to try and do something good for people around you. And every human has a responsibility to stand up against injustice. That's just a simple fact. If you can't do even that, I'm not sure what we're doing exactly.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I mean, but some people take the easy road, right? And just go, okay, well, I won't get involved in that. But you've obviously taken a decision that you've got a platform, you have a voice, you're going to use it. Being a commentator on SBS must have helped with that as well, kind of having to communicate the love of your love of the game to other people, to a broader audience, and bringing them along. How did you find that was reciprocated back home in Australia when you started talking about these issues as a commentator?
I go from, and I'm perfectly aware of this, that I go from like really upsetting Australia to like really making Australia happy, within very short spaces of time. And I often say, so when I got an AM, for example, a few years ago, people would say, oh, that's really great. I say, well, let's see how long it lasts. Right? Because if you don't like injustice, and if you are one of the people who is prepared to step forward and say, look, that's wrong, even if you don't like those people, and even if we're all told that those people are really evil, that's actually wrong. And if it's wrong against us, it's wrong against them. And therefore, I've never understood that distinction, right? If you're going to do that, you're going to go against the prevailing culture very often. I always understood that. I understood that in my teams. When I would stand up for players within my own environment who were being externalised by the club, people would often step away from them, and I'd always say, no, that's not right. So, and I had the power as a Socceroo or whatever, and I would say, and that often puts you offside with power. You know, and SBS is a good one because I spent 20 years there. I did 6 World Cups. But at the same time, the reason that I left is because I was speaking too much about refugees.
Yeah, right.
So, you know, there's a line where every organisation, it becomes too much for them, even though for me, I used to say to them, this is human rights. This is not like anti-Australian government stuff, right? But this is the sensitivity of corporate world. Everyone has their line where it is. And I didn't do this World Cup, you know, because these days, you know, everyone involved knows that I would have said something about Trump.
Yeah.
I would have said something about, because he's hosting the World Cup. Well, I said it about Putin in Russia. And I said it about Qatar in 2022. But all of a sudden, everyone's up, you know, is very sensitive now that if we put Craig on air, he's going to say that Trump is, you know, doing all this ridiculous stuff, supporting genocide in the Middle East and stuff. He's going to mention that on air. And we really loved when he did it to Qatar. We really loved when he did it to Russia, but we can't have him doing it to US.
Yes.
So then you find yourself, you know, you're not on air.
Yeah.
So there are costs to pay to, you know, be honest in society. But, you know, you just have to decide and, you know, make the decision whether you're prepared to pay them.
Yeah. Well, I wonder, I mean, I think there's a lot of debate at the moment about how much we're allowed to, you know, we should be platforming criticism of the US, criticism of the Israeli government, criticism of, you know, of other countries that are blatantly abusing human rights. But if we're in some trade negotiation with them, then should we really be questioning them? And there's always these pressures. But I think right now, our public broadcasters, SBS and ABC, are really at the front of that. They're really copying it. You would have seen Pauline Hanson suggest that we need to, you know, cut the ABC. In fact, scrap SBS is what she said.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
She wants to kill SBS. I did wonder how smart that was of a policy to announce in the middle of the World Cup when Australians are watching
Didn't think that
the
through.
world.
She's obviously not a football supporter.
She's
so
obviously
probably
not.
surprised. What's this World Cup?
She's obviously not a football supporter. It seemed crazy to me to say, you know, let's.
Yeah, it wasn't well timed. No.
Let's dump the
When
SBS.
the Socceroos are walking out, you know, with like a whole bunch of ex-refugees who are our stars, and then they're scoring goals against Turkey. That's not a good place to be when you're making that argument.
No. What did you make of her pitch for, you know, we shouldn't be multicultural, we should be monocultural?
Look, I thought it was ridiculous, obviously. I mean, I worked 16 years for a multicultural broadcaster, and I play football in the most multicultural game in the country. So, you know, I'm not probably the one to ask. But the thing is, I think it's about, you know, Australia's trying to have a conversation since The Voice and even previous that, but you know, about who are we actually? You know, what is the idea of Australia? What, you know, because we could talk about our common values a lot, and there is a value statement, obviously, that new citizens sign and the like.
Yes.
But the problem is that because we've had so long decades of culture wars, you know, mostly propagated by News Limited, who basically started the whole thing, from what I can see. What's happened?
I think that's true.
So what's happened now is you can't even have all of these conversations. I think that's the problem. I don't mind having a conversation about immigration. Immigration, important conversation. I don't mind having the conversation about what it means to be Australian and to contribute to Australia. I think that's all important stuff. The problem is when you try and use it, and it's obvious that you're using it against communities.
Yes.
You're only
To
using
denigrate.
it to divide. That's the
Yes.
only reason that you're using it. And what happens is the people on the right want to do that, and they want to take these terms and turn the terms into pejorative weapons. And then so what happens is the people on the left have to completely avoid the issues, because to even talk about, you know, whatever the issue is, you know, if any communities, cultural communities in Australia have challenges and have issues and have criminality, which all communities do, all of a sudden, you know, on the left of politics, they have to completely avoid it, because they know to even wade into it just goes to racism.
Yeah.
I see this and I see it because I've been in media 20 plus years, of course, but also because of the refugee advocacy I did. It was very acute because what happens is you would have News Limited and other organisations saying that all refugees are criminals and they're my friends.
Yes.
And then you would have the refugee sector saying, well, they're all angels.
Yes.
And there's nothing in between.
Yes.
They're
And
people.
of course that's not that doesn't reflect human nature.
Well, they're people.
They're people. They're people.
Right. So one's trying to use a small cohort to demonise the mass, and the others are trying to forget a small cohort to save the mass. It's a ridiculous situation to be in. Australia's stuck in that in every aspect. That's where our media has got us to, unfortunately, and that's why...
It's very black and white. You're either in this camp or you're in that camp, and there's nothing in between.
Yeah, and of course social media preys on that and profits from that.
Yes.
So that's exacerbated it badly.
Yeah.
And then you have misinformation, which makes it even worse. So now we can't even agree on what truth is.
No.
Because, I mean, my parents will sometimes up in Lismore, my father rang me a while ago. I saw this fantastic thing, with Malcolm Turnbull in it, and I think this, I said, listen, it's not even real. So, you've got a whole section, elderly and so on, of Australia who can't determine.
Yeah.
Nor should they be able to determine whether what they're reading is real or otherwise.
Yes, and they're being fed fake, fake news or fake information. And yes, and increasingly deliberately so.
Oh, and deliberately, massive campaigns, billions of dollars being spent on it. And what that means is, and they grew up in a time when the media was trusted. And so you've got a lot of Australians who can't distinguish between, whether it could even be fake or, or have the tools to be able to fact check everything, which is just an absolute pain in the rear. So, all of those issues are exacerbating the division and carry on.
So, over this debate about media and where media is and the role of the public broadcasters in particular, because they have, the ABC has for generations been held up as the trusted source. And now we have political opponents like Pauline Hanson and One Nation doing everything they can to denigrate the ABC, to kind of feed this idea that it should be defunded, it's not trustworthy. Of course, so then there's no genuine fact checking. But I was just thinking about how the role of the public broadcaster isn't just to have news and to be a kind of single source of truth, but in the instance of, say, the World Cup or other sport, it's actually important that it's able to be accessible to people and that they don't have to pay shitloads of dollars in subscription fees to be able to watch it. You know, what happens if Pauline Hanson wants to cut SBS? Where's the World Cup go? It'll probably go behind a paywall on KO, won't it?
Well, possibly. The thing is, public broadcasters are very, very important, provided that they do have guardrails around them. There's many public broadcasters in the world who obviously are horrific.
Yes.
And I think we have that with the Senate estimates and the questioning of them. That's important. Australia would be in a very, very bad place without that balance. I don't think there's any question about that. If you want to kill multiculturalism, or the idea that people can respect their ancestral background and perhaps even speak another language, you probably have to kill SBS because it's done a great job. It was groundbreaking, actually. I think it was Malcolm. Was it Fraser? Yeah. It was a fantastic initiative that Australia should be very proud of. And the reason why that SBS always had the World Cup was not because it even wanted to show Australians the world so much. What was its old slogan? Was SBS bringing the world back home? It was more that it was wanting Australians to learn more about the world so that they could understand the Australian next to them.
Yeah.
That's why Les used to tell SBS, you need to pay all this money and lose some money on it because at that time, of course, they couldn't get the commercials, either, sponsors.
Yes.
Is because it showed Australia what their Korean Australian community were like. Right? It wasn't that SBS wanted to show them the Korean national team.
Yeah.
It's that we wanted to understand ourselves better.
Yes. And ourselves in our beautiful diversity that we are.
Exactly.
And and in that, I guess, you can be the Australian you're sitting next to might be from Korea, but you can both be barracking for the Socceroos.
Well, this is the power of sport. I don't think there's anything like it in the world at the moment. If you look at what happens with diplomats and countries, for example, they go there, most of them hate each other, they backstab each other, they apply the rules unequally, and I thought the Canadian Prime Minister spoke very eloquently about that, even though he's at the forefront of it. They do the same thing, but he at least admitted it. I don't know if you remember about 6 months ago where he was saying, listen, this rules-based order in essence is good. That's why I like the human rights instruments. They can all be improved, but they're the best attempt that humanity's had to date to try and give people basic access to the provisions they need to live a productive life. And he said, but it's obvious to the world now that, we just don't apply them equally, and that we just use the language. And this is what the Australian government's doing. It's what Penny Wong has just become an absolute expert at in the last 3 years. And there's a lot of Australians like me who just switched off, just going, look, that's just disgusting. Like we tell ourselves that we are, that fairness is important to us. Well, it is to me, So when I see Australia saying, oh, this over here is a war crime and this over here, well, that's a bit difficult, we can't work it out. It just, I just switch off. I just say, look, that's just ridiculous. Australians, you're insulting us. You're insulting our intelligence. Why can't we just do that in the world?
And surely you talk about the kind of the various values of who we are as a nation, and we're grappling with that, right? Fairness, equality,
exactly.
Looking after your mates. I mean, one of the values I would say is calling bullshit.
That's
we're
exactly
pretty good
right.
at calling bullshit.
That's true. That's true. I think we are. I don't know. Maybe we should do it a hell of a lot more often because there's a lot around. But yeah, look, I'm sensitive to the way that Australia acts. I played for the country, and not that that's anything special to most people, but not
everybody gets to do that.
It's nice for us. We worked hard for it, but also it does give us a sense of, Australia on the world stage. Like we actually went out there. It's not as though. So, we were actually carrying the flag and we were, wearing this stuff, and then we were competing against other countries, and, and we took that to heart. We took that seriously. So when Australia goes onto the world stage with such a lack of ambition, such a lack of honesty, such a lack of integrity, and then says, oh, well, this is, this is just what the world is, and we have to make these lies, and we can't. I see other countries doing it properly. I see other countries being much more neutral. I think we're geographically placed perfectly anyway to be a country that says, listen, guys, we love you all, or we don't, depending on what you do. We don't hold any prejudice against any of you. We just want the world to work in this way.
Yes.
And if you guys stuff it up, we're going to call it out. And,
But coming back to the kind of the power of sport in cutting through all of that.
Yeah.
And I once heard you talk about, you talk about it as a leveler. It's a level playing field, but as something that is kind of almost a common language worldwide.
Yes.
So it instantly connects.
Sure.
So you can break down those barriers, right?
Sure.
You can say, even though you live over here and I live here, and I eat this and you eat that, and your president's a fuckwit.
Yeah. When there's many in the world. I mean,
so, but there is something about football that allows you to connect and find something in common instantly.
That's right. So what Australians have felt in terms of standing shoulder to shoulder when everyone's telling us we have to hate so many of us, right? It doesn't matter what it is, whether it's faith, colour, whatever. It's all about now excluding someone, and you're not as Australian as me, and all of this sort of stuff. And then the Socceroos and Matildas go play, and then all of a sudden you're just yelling and jumping up and down with like 10 people around you.
Yeah.
And I often say, and no one turns around and says, listen, before we celebrate here, can you just tell me like what sort of visa you're on, how long you've been here, right? Like, do you agree with our flag? Would you like to take the Union Jack off? Like, what's the deal? Because I can't celebrate. So it just cuts through everything like that. And it also does that on the global stage. So when two countries are arguing about whatever, or they're being told they have to hate each other, and then they play in a World Cup particularly, then you just see, like, people don't care. They're just, all of a sudden, they're just football fans.
We're actually stripped back to who we are as
That's
humans.
what happens. Sport can do that. Sport then preys on that. Sport says, like, FIFA's good at this. It then says we bring the world together, da-da-da. But what that does, it gives you a responsibility as well to actually conduct yourself properly. So if you're exclusionary and discriminatory against other countries, just because the fans can immediately get on there, that doesn't mean that you're facilitating that. The game has always done that. Right, but football loves to say, like Infantino, the president at the moment. Oh, look what football's done. Well, mate, you almost stuffed it up. Like, you've done you've done everything not to make it happen, right? But it's always going to happen, irrespective of you. So don't claim credit for it.
Because it's the people at the
it's
end
the
of the day.
people of the world, and you know what? The truth is, we don't look at ourselves as people of the world enough, do we? That's the problem.
We kind of, and I think, it's easy to say, well, Australia's, we're at the bottom of the globe. We're an island nation. We can kind of pull down the shutters, block everybody out until we want to kind of wake up and, peek out the curtain. But actually everything we do is somehow connected.
Well, all of it is connected. Like, this is the point. I mean, I think I don't know what purposes that served, but certainly over decades and decades, Australian politicians anyway, the so-called leaders at various times have really propagated this message that, we shouldn't get involved anywhere, and, what we do.
Keep our head down.
Yeah, can't really make a difference. And I think that's very sad, particularly culturally, when we love our athletes who go and win gold medals and, win stuff. So there's a real unease there that I find. I think Australians should have ambition. Of course, the real politic of the day means that, geez, you've got to step slightly more carefully. You're going to get tariffed, and you're going to get sanctioned out of, whatever. So, of course, you have to calibrate, where the world is at a particular time. But the fact is that Australia's, what ambition do we actually have? I couldn't actually know. That's why people love sport. Yeah. Because sport is our real ambition at the moment. Like, I would say it's really only the athletes of the country. Maybe you could say like the Cannon Brooks, maybe you could say maybe a few tech or whatever. And certainly we've had actors. That's why we love our actors.
Yep.
These people who go and take on the world, it's no wonder that we go, oh, geez, thank God, bloody hell, we love that. Because the rest of the time we're just bombarded by messages about how we should do nothing.
Yes, or bombarded with content from America. I mean, just think about the stories that flood our screens and our and through our earbuds, our music. So much of the stuff that we're consuming as Australians is actually less and less Australian owned and less of an Australian voice. So
yeah, it's true.
We kind of
so all the so-called culture warriors. This is what always gets me.
Yeah.
Oh, so I see Hanson and all the culture warriors. Oh, I'm the most Australian person ever. And I'm going to protect Australia, and I'm going to make Australia great again. Right.
She's in the UK at the moment, hanging out with some right wing, podcasters.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not very Australian.
No, so but this is the argument, and what they, and often they don't say it, but this is populism, has always been the case. I'm the most Australian person ever, and I'm going to cheer when this happens, and blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And then I look at you and I say, well, okay, we've got a head of state who's not even Australian, right? And we haven't really recognised our Indigenous people, and we've got a flag that doesn't represent modern Australia anyway. And you're the people who are telling everyone that you're most Australian. Right? I think it's the people who challenge Australia to be better. I think it's the people who want sovereignty. I think it's the people who respect Indigenous Australians. And I think it's the people who respect every other Australian of every ancestry and says, listen, we love the Greeks, Italians, Lebanese, Turks. Like, we're all Australian. I think they're the people that actually love Australia. It's not the ones who say, everyone get out, and I want to keep a king. Right, who couldn't give two hoofs about Australia? Like, well, I mean, how is it that we're sitting here? I don't get it.
It is. It does feel very. It's gaslighting, isn't it?
It is gaslighting. Yeah, it is gaslighting. And all you got to do is use certain cultural artifacts, and make sure you're closest to them, and blah blah blah. And
yes, I remember there was that time when Tony Abbott was Prime Minister where he had that ridiculous amount of flags.
Yeah.
And that somehow made him,
it's all that stuff.
It gave him a bigger sense that he really was the Prime Minister. The more flags he had, the more Prime Minister he was.
That's right. Yeah.
Come on, just do the job, mate.
You know what? I mean, Australians, like, you don't perform in sport unless you challenge yourself and challenge your teammates and challenge everyone around you to excel. You know, to me, you know, so what does it mean to be Australian? It means to want the best for everyone in Australia. And that means we have to challenge our inadequacies and our myths and stuff. That's critical to being better. But it also means that we should have at least enough pride as Australians, I certainly do, to say we should be doing some stuff on the global stage. Like, we can be a very, very significant actor because we do have an amazing culture.
And I guess that's, so not talking ourselves down, not kind of hiding under the desk, whether it's speaking out on human rights, whether it's, calling out the bullshit where we see it on the world stage when, Donald Trump's behaving
we're just lying.
Appallingly. And yes, so, and of course, the other issue that really gets me on this is climate change. You hear all the time people saying, particularly from the right, and you hear it from the Murdoch press all the time, we're just a small contributor. We're a small country. There's nothing we can do. We're the third largest exporter of fossil fuels in the world. We could have a huge role in helping the planet get to a better place and helping the climate. But, no, let's hide under the desk and pretend that it's not our problem and we couldn't fix it. You're saying let's have more pride. Let's actually stand up and fight.
Well, I just want more honesty, that's all. Like, let's just be honest about like everything, really. And because it's ideological wars all the time in much of our media, it's not honest. Like, we know when countries are doing the wrong stuff.
Yes.
Right. And Australians, we do have still a reasonable bullshit meter. Don't keep telling us that this is great and we don't need to be worried about it. Okay. We also know that we're giving half our gas away and that, and Japan's profiting. Like, that's our stuff. That's our kids' stuff.
That's our gas. It's our kids' gas. It's our future.
So, and people who want to stand in front of Australia and justify that, they're just lying. Like, just stop lying to us.
It is reminding me of, someone's done something wrong in the schoolyard and the group gets called into the principal's office and the kids kind of, head down looking at their feet, no one wanting to go, this guy did the wrong thing. The bully gets away with it because countries like Australia kind of try and hide.
Yeah.
Or want to be friends with the bully. Is that more the issue?
Well, I don't mind who Australia is friends with. It's just I don't buy into the whole, the ideological issues about we have to be on this side of the world, not on this side of the world, and then we're here and then we're here. And because that's difficult to hold up today. There's too much information. There's too much social media. We see the whole world now, and we don't need to be told who it is we should be or shouldn't be supporting. I mean, it's all pretty obvious now. Yeah. And so what that means is you've got to prop up this idea of America that's no longer real under Trump. And so the whole world, and the ridiculous nature of this is the whole world is changing. Like, the tectonic plates are clearly shifting, right? Because the global south is woken up. And then you've had what's happened in Palestine, for example, and most of the support for the West. That's a huge global issue that most of the countries in the world have just said, okay, that's breaking international law, because most of the countries in the world are just saying, okay, I mean, this is just ridiculous now.
You can't do this. These are war crimes.
Yeah, and you're trying to tell us it's this.
And if, the question is if we can call it out for Russia, if we can put sanctions on Russia.
And that's the point.
How can we not?
Well, this is what the world sees, not just Australia. Of course, a lot of Australians see that as well. And it doesn't matter to me about the specific issues. Like, it doesn't matter if it's Sudan or here and there. All I want Australia to be able to do is to say, okay, listen, guys, this is what we've signed up to. We signed up to all this stuff. And yes, we've got some issues, challenges here and putting the stuff in as well. So we're not perfect. But when it comes to playing our role as a global actor, we're just saying, even if you are a perceived ally and or you're a great trade partner, if this issue goes to the ICC or it goes to the UN Security Council or here, don't expect our support. Right? Now, we can do all this other stuff together, but the one thing with Australia is don't expect us to lie.
Yeah.
We're not
Yeah.
going to do it.
Yeah.
And so we're going to vote there, and don't bother coming and trying to tell
Yeah,
us that
yeah.
it's not right and it's real,
Yeah.
because Australians just aren't buying that rubbish anymore.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, Australia, Carney's calling it out globally, saying, listen, we've all been lying. That's what he said. He goes, the whole rule-based order is great, but we've all been lying because we haven't been applying it fairly. That's the honest truth. Australia, and the mad thing is, he's saying that, and Australia's still doing the same stuff.
Yeah.
We're still trying to pretend. We're completely pretending when we go and vote in all these things. I think that's an embarrassment to Australia. I'm very sad about it, because I just have more faith in Australians' ability to actually be, to be a good actor in the world. Like, we are good people. We are a great country, and we should be, at the forefront of this stuff, saying, we can always be better.
And having pride in our nation means protecting these things, actually.
Well, this is what a nation is.
Not selling ourselves short, not selling ourselves out, and it's certainly not selling out our integrity. You're talking about to be proud of your country, you need to defend our integrity.
Yeah, well, this is the point. So now we're talking about social cohesion and Australian values. Well, every time our foreign minister goes to the UN to speak about something, there's absolutely no values involved. Right? I mean, this is not about Penny Wong. She's just the latest. It doesn't matter. I don't care who it is.
Yes.
That's obvious. I'm talking about Australia. So, this is the ridiculous nature of the national conversation. So you're trying to tell me that we've got these wonderful Australian values that I actually want to pass on to our children and in the schools. I would love to do that. This is understanding of our history, here where we went wrong, here where we went right. We've got all this stuff right. This is how amazing stuff we do. But by the way, this is what we expect from everyone. And then, the Prime Minister and Foreign Minister waltz over there and say, oh, no, these sanctions are perfectly fine, or this is not a war crime, or yes, we signed the Genocide Convention, but we're not going to actually do anything about it. I mean, don't talk to us about values.
Yeah, or we're not going to stand up when we see people returning refugees back into the hands of, abusive nations and countries where they've fled.
Well, that's another whole big issue. But, I am concerned about the next generation. I'm really focused on the kids in the unis and everywhere else. I think they're always idealistic, which is important,
So let me ask you about that. Like, are you optimistic?
Oh, I'm immensely optimistic, yeah. I think the next generation's amazing. I think they're amazing. I think social media, it has a lot of ills, that's for sure, but I think it's also shown them a different world to what our generation saw and were taught. And so this generation, if my, our youngest, and probably if I'm talking generationally, like our eldest son's 29, so probably our middle daughter, mid-20s, and our young daughter's 19, like they're a completely different mentality. Like they, when this racist exclusion, and characterisation of people's going on, which has been going on in Australia forever, but they just go, what are these people talking about?
Yes.
We just grew up in school with these people. Like, this is my friend, for God's sake.
Well, that's what gets me about, again, Pauline Hanson and One Nation's rant, and then where they want to take the country, and you see, the Liberal Party really kind of being dragged there, and, there's this kind of march to the right. And when Pauline Hanson stands up and says, 1 in 4 Australians don't speak English, or 1 in 4 Australians were, not born here, or whose parents weren't born here, and that is some kind of problem. I'm like, hang on a minute. Like, that is who we are. That is Australia. So trying to convince the broader population that is somehow a problem, I think she's got Buckley's chance.
Racism always hits. There's always, fear always works to a degree. So, I would always be concerned about it. There's plenty of people rise to, it doesn't have to be to power, but to some form of notoriety and power on hatred and fear and division. This is human nature. So, to me, I'd always be concerned about it.
So we do have to worry about it, even though young people might not accept it. It's still a vicious, and it's a nastiness that finds the cracks, doesn't it?
that's what I was going to say. So the thing about it, any of these arguments is you can always find weaknesses in any society, in any issue. So this is what I was talking before about polarities. So, and I've seen this over decades. So Australian football has been closely associated with immigration correctly, and therefore we've also seen the problems of immigration. So the point is that Australia should not. This is why I say we should just be honest. So we should not pretend that immigration and even multiculturalism does not carry challenges. Of course it carries bloody challenges. That's why I sat on the Multicultural Council for 6 years. Because look at what happened, for example, in the former Yugoslavia. So, you had the Croats and Serbs. And so when those communities came here, those enmities were already within those communities. And many of those enmities played out within our football environment. And they were my teammates. And I played for a Serb and a Croat club. And I had no idea about it when I was a kid. And all of a sudden I came to understand. But then over time, the beauty, the wonder of Australia, this incredible social experiment has been that over time, people realise this is a much more amazing place. This is a bloody incredible culture, and we can leave all that crap behind.
Yeah.
And
they do.
And they do. But let's not pretend that they didn't have challenges between all of the communities. And often they're, and by communities, I'm just saying Australians.
Yes.
Right? But of course we have Nazism at the same time as we have many different forms of extremism. And we should be able to just say all extremism is wrong. But we can't, because we're trying to prioritise some groups over others. And therefore, some extremism has to be extremely shocking and the worst, and other extremism doesn't get even talked about. This is the problem. What I'm saying is we need a new a kind of Australian idealism, if you like, in that let's just get back to just like being honest about all of the issues. Let's not take them to the extreme for political reasons, and let's just solve them. Because, Australians are great people, but we're being bombarded just by absolute rubbish.
And it's a lazy type of politics, isn't it, to just go the nasty and the division first. It means you don't really have to come up with any of the answers to resolve any of the actual issues.
Yeah,
there's no solutions being offered here.
No. That's throughout history. That's been many people do that. You don't even have to have a brain, really. All you got to do is be hateful. And if you're hateful and you can articulate that to enough people, you can create a movement of hate very, very quickly. So, we have to be guarded against that for sure, and we need good Australians always to be stepping up. The problem that we have at the moment as well is that the price of speaking out against a whole range of things is the highest that it's ever been. The personal price, the professional price, a career price, and that's making it more and more difficult. And what worries me is that once you see that kind of way of working, it becomes the norm. Yeah. So whatever political extremism you want to push, the first thing you realise you need to do is remove opponents from the public space.
Well, one of the guests I've previously had on here was Antoinette Lattouf, who, obviously paid the big price of being removed from the ABC. Yes. So whether it's sponsorship being cancelled, whether it's not being given gigs, whether it's being sacked publicly or privately, there is a crackdown on people speaking up. Yeah. So the cost of speaking out is obviously a really important point, and you talked about not covering SBS, not being on SBS and covering the World Cup this time round. Why do you think it's important for people to, regardless of that, just be a straight shooter? There's a cost, but what I'm hearing from you is it's worth it.
Yeah, I don't criticise people who don't, because we're all in different positions. And for me, I had a lengthy broadcast and sporting career, and I think I have a responsibility to just call a spade. And plus, when it comes to human rights, you realise that there's always a cost for speaking about human rights. Yeah. Not all of them. Some of them are very easy. The refugee issue was a similar one, is that there's always been in the last 20 years a reasonable cost, sometimes very high in 01, Tampa, and then it starts to become a bit more normalised. And then that's why I bring sport into it, because then you can make it a bit wider, normalise, the humanisation of refugees and the like. So sport's very good at that. So look, I'm just in a position where I'm at the time of my life as well, where I just think, there's no time to waste as well.
And you're worried about the future of the country. So
yeah, that's right. And the next generation. So I'm particularly focused on the next generation. So I'm like, look, if I was a kid in university now and I was thinking, look, I know what right and wrong is. It's pretty obvious. But I'm being told by all of these so-called leaders of Australia that wrong is right and, it's actually upside down. I'd be hoping that there's some well-known Australians who are actually going to show me that, that's not dead. Because I place a lot of hope in them, and I'm very worried about, this generation of leadership in Australia, about how captured they are, quite frankly.
Can I ask you a question about the capturedness? Because I couldn't have you on here talking about the power of sport and broadcasting and capture of politicians without asking you about gambling advertising, because it's something that I've been speaking about recently. We're about to have it in the Parliament. There's this piece of legislation to try and do something, but it's pretty weak because the politicians have been captured. And you've been in all of those different facets. What's your view about this?
Yeah. So there has to be limits on gambling in sport, that's for sure. It has to be, it's just perfect common sense. So the thing is, Australian politics at the moment has been found out to be extremely captured by a whole range of fields. And I think Australians have woken up to that now, and we weren't even clear like how bad it was. But certainly fossil fuels, obviously, gas industry, that's become obvious. Here we are, we're tinkering with rules for housing and the like. And now we've got CGT and even super stuff, which is affecting, even people who have just worked hard all their lives and tried to, and been told that you have to put something away, right? And all of a sudden, you're taking these things away from at the same time that you won't actually tax the multinational gas companies. That is insane. So, if that's the way you're going to operate, you can't expect to have credibility. You've got to say, what does fairness look like across all of these fields
consistently and with integrity.
This is the point, and I just don't understand how it's so hard. Of course, I'm not in a party politics. That's why I'm not there in party politics. One reason. I also enjoy what I do, but the thing is,
I think there'd be a lot of people listening, Craig, of going, "When's this guy going to run for Parliament?"
Well, people often ask, but the thing is, how am I going to survive in party politics when, this is my view of the world? It's just extremely difficult, because it's like, okay, you got to now shut up about this stuff, And I say, well, but that's contrary to the values that we're talking out the side of our mouth out here. And now you want me to talk out this side, and I can't talk out the side.
I think I I hear you.
That's probably obvious.
I hear you. I think that's the thing that gets me the most about, my job, being in politics, is it's almost this expectation that you don't say what's going on.
Yeah.
When I'm like, that's my job. My job is to represent the people.
That's right.
And look at what's going on and say, right, hang on, is this right?
Exactly. We lost our way. I think we lost our way in politics badly. The idea that you actually are there to represent the people who elected you and to do what's in the best interests of Australia, that's been completely forgotten. Well, not completely, but certainly in the broad, in the big leadership umbrella, if you like, the people who are talking to Australia and taking us, they've just completely forgotten it.
But let me put this to you. The vested interests want everyone to give up on politics, right? So they, the gas companies would love for us all to go, you know what?
Yeah.
Oh, politics is broken. Right. Don't worry, bow out. Yeah. Don't look at it. Hide under the table. Right. They want us to not be interested in politics. True. And this is what I'm finding this whole conversation quite inspiring, because you're saying it doesn't matter whether it's politics, whether it's sport. These issues are the same.
They're the same.
And actually, the only way you deal with them is to
Be engaged.
Be engaged.
That's totally right. I think Australians have been taught that, it's not necessary to be engaged, unfortunately. But we need to turn that around. That's why I have hope in the next generation, And I do think that a younger politics, people like you, people like independents, people like I think this has hit the young generation well.
Yeah.
I don't know that, I'm just surmising, but because what they're hearing is not just the same, just often bullshit. It's just like, oh, this is the way it happens and this is how it has to happen. Everyone knows it's not right. And what's happened with a younger generation of politicians is also, that's why I think you're right doing this, absolutely, is because your responsibility is to the people. And so what's traditionally happened is, of course, you needed certain media to carry your messages to the people. But now what politicians around the world have worked out, and Mamdani's very good at this in New York, for example.
Yeah.
What they've worked out is, I can circumvent everyone. It just doesn't matter anymore. And I can just come straight to you. And that is the most power that politicians can actually have, as long as you're authentic, as long as you're not double-sided. Because you'll also be found out quickly. But that's an immensely powerful tool.
Yes, and being able to have a direct relationship with people. I think that's not to say news journalism isn't important, because we still need to be held to account.
No, news journalism is critically important.
But in terms of actually listening to people and communicating, I think one of the things that technology has offered us is an amazing opportunity to do that. And, I can sit here and speak to you and speak to my listeners and not be filtered through News Corp.
Unbelievable.
Bring it on, I say.
Yeah, it's incredible. But you're absolutely right. I think we need to rediscover a lot of news journalism and public interest journalism.
Actual news journalism, not just vested interest opinion.
That's a space where, I think the next generation, I'm hoping that, they can be much more rigorous. And again, like people need jobs, and so I can understand why people toe company lines, and I can understand why they tone down and they use euphemistic language and this and that. But you always need the brave ones.
Okay, you're not going to run for politics, but what you're showing here is that you don't actually have to be a politician to be engaged, to have, to make a difference, to use your voice.
Well, I'm not going to now at the moment. But I think
not ruling it out. I just heard a not ruling it out there.
Well, that's because I believe that we're all political actors anyway, and somehow engaging in politics is a responsibility we have, particularly as we get older. Anyway, it can be one of the most powerful tools to try and bring change. So it's always an option. But I do think that Australians, should understand that everything we do is political, because it either shapes a better Australia. It either shapes a better world or it doesn't. And that doesn't matter if you are saying something about your hospitals, saying something about the roads and why we got toll roads, or whether you're talking about how we sell our resources or how we prepare for a non-fossil fuel future. All of it is critically important because it ultimately pushes politics in a certain way. And perhaps at the moment, the best thing that we can all do as Australians is just say, okay, just cut the crap. We just want honesty. And if we've signed up to this stuff, let's apply it. And don't try and tell us that B is A, that down is up any longer, and that red is yellow, because we're not buying it.
Thanks so much for coming in, Craig. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, it's been fun.